The tin I store my coin collection in fell apart the other day due to the weight of the coins. So I decided that I would just build a new custom coin collector's box. To ensure it can support the weight this time, I've decided to make it with dovetail joints. This is my first attempt, so watch closely and learn from my mistakes. As my coin collection has grown, I've decided just to make the box a little bit bigger this time, so here I'm just going to get some roundabout figures and start cutting. I purchased two pieces of 6-foot white pine, one 4-inch width and the other 2-inch width. The 4-inch piece will be for the base of the box and the 2-inch piece will be for the lid. The numbers I chose were 12 inches by 18 inches. Make sure you use a square on your first piece to ensure your very first cut is very accurate. After you make your first cut, I'm going to kind of cheat and just use that board as a template. That way, if you're a little bit off, you're cutting both boards and they will maintain the exact same size. And that's very important when making dovetails. So here I just take a scrap piece of wood and make sure the butt ends of the board I'm cutting are flush. And we'll do this for both the 18-inch and the 12-inch pieces. I don't have any of the $100 marking tools, so this is why I do it the cheater's way. I want to make sure that it's perfect. And then again, I am just a home do-it-yourselfer. Once you have all four of your base pieces cut, don't forget to go ahead and cut your lid pieces as well using the same template. Once you have all your pieces cut, go ahead and line up your box and decide which sides of the board you want facing out. Then place a small X on all the outer pieces. Today I will be using my Porter Cable dovetail jig. Against popular opinion, I actually cut my tails first and my pins second. Today I'm using a Craftsman variable speed router. This is soft white pine, so it really doesn't matter how fast you go. So quickly switch the bit out and go ahead and start cutting your pins. Remember to keep looking for the X you marked on your face boards and make sure that X is facing you when you're loading your boards. At this point, just check your fit and just make sure they're nice and snug, or make your adjustments and start over. At this point, decide which is going to be the base of the box and place a small X on each piece at the lower end of the base. I purchased a small piece of plexiglass for the lid, and it measures at 1/4 inch in width. I've decided to go with a thinner lid, so I took my lid pieces and I cut them each in half. For the plexiglass insert, I'm just going to eyeball this and lower the table saw blade to about down around 1/4 inch and then just make my cuts. This doesn't have to be perfect, you just need enough of a groove so the plexiglass fits securely in the wood. So center your piece, and then remember you're going to be taking a little bit more than one saw blade, about a saw blade and a half. So cheat over just a hair, make your first cut, and then move it over to make your second cut. And then readjust as needed. Okay, now with your groove cut at 1/4 inch, you're ready to start your frame. Now you can use a miter saw to make your frame, but I'm going to use my framing jig and keep using my tabletop. As you can see, I made my framing jig out of a couple of pieces of particle board. When using a miter saw, you have to spend a lot more time making sure your cuts are exactly at 45 degrees. With a framing jig, you just lay it in the track and you know each side. Even if you're off on 45 degrees, both sides will match up perfectly. Make sure before starting your cut that your insert is facing you when you start to cut. After making all your cuts, I lightly sand it down just to make sure there's no rough edges. Okay, since we didn't really measure our insert groove, go ahead and lay your frame down and make sure you have your insert properly aligned, and then mark all the pieces so you know which side goes up. If your insert doesn't align properly, just flip the piece over, it's probably upside down. Measure the depth of your groove and times by 2 and add the overall inside width of your frame. Do this on both sides of your frame. The plexiglass comes with a clear sheet of plastic over it, so do not remove that because we're going to write right on that after we get our measurements. Using my square, a yardstick, and a Sharpie, I go ahead and draw the lines for my lid. Now you can use an X-Acto knife, a table saw, or a bandsaw, but the plexiglass cuts really easy. Go ahead and put your lid together to make sure all the pieces still fit snug after you have the plexiglass installed. Then you're going to take the plexiglass back out, pull off your protective plastic, and go ahead and glue your frame together. Keep a paper towel close by. You don't want to get too much excess glue anywhere, and just wipe it down as you go. That will also keep it off the plexiglass. I just used a quick couple of Irwin clamps and clamp down the corners until it dries and secures. One last check to make sure everything is square, and then just place your lid out of the way so it can dry. Now we're going to cut a groove for the coin tube rack. So you're going to do this on your two 18-inch boards. The key to this is make sure your groove is cut inside the socket. Do not cut through your tail. Keep in mind that your groove goes across the top of your base pieces. Earlier you marked the base piece bottoms with an X, so make sure you look for this. Now, in order to have a seamless base piece in a dovetail box, you have to go back to a router. Now, this gets pretty tricky because you can't just cut it on a table saw, or your pins will have small cuts in them. I took a small piece of 2x4 and cut the width to match the width of my box. This will allow me not to worry about keeping the router balanced on the box's edge as I cut. Remember, your box should be flipped over and you're cutting along the base bottom of your box where you've put your X's. Okay, before I continued on, I cleaned up the work area. It was starting to get really messy. To ensure the bottom piece corners fit correctly, I needed to chisel out what was left in the ends of my groove. I simply used a putty knife and a small screwdriver. Be very careful not to split your wood. Take your time doing this. Now, using the same process you did for the lid, measure the depth of your groove times by 2, and then make sure you do this for both sides, and then mark your piece and cut it. I didn't want to place any more undue stress on my tails and pins, so I left the boards apart this time, and I just measured the distance of the inside of the board, and then here you see me add the times 2 what the groove depth was. Make your marks, draw your lines, and then go make your cut. With dovetails, you need to start by putting together a corner. Apply the glue into your groove and then insert the base piece. Apply this process to one more piece, leaving the face of the box still open. Before we put in our last tails piece, we're going to take our plexiglass and we're going to measure the length and make our cut. This will be for our coin rack. Pulling out my hole saw kit, I matched the appropriate hole saw to the corresponding size of my coin tubes. Once I had identified all the ones I would use, I took the coin tubes back out and I traced where I was going to make my cuts. From there, simply cut out all your marks. My quarter tube did not have a corresponding hole saw size, so I will be using for the first time my adjustable drill bit that I purchased online for $4. Any excuse to buy a tool, right? This is a pretty nifty tool and works quite well. I just found it difficult to set each side in the precisely needed position that would match the other side before cutting. I would not recommend purchasing one of these unless you have the patience to adjust it, which I do not. Remember when doing all this to leave on the plastic coating to protect it while you're making these cuts. Don't take the plastic coating off. Remember that I am not following any guidelines here, so my first failure is thinking that the plexiglass could support the weight of the coin tubes. Yeah, maybe if they remain empty. So the slots on the side will not be used, but somehow I will figure out how I will incorporate them in. So taking a hard look at the box, I decided to build a base to keep the tubes secure. This will prevent the plexiglass from sliding. So I will now have to choose which side I will want the rack to remain on. So the holes for the base of the coin rack will be easy to make. Just use the plexiglass as a template and draw out your holes and then start cutting. I found the wood a lot easier to cut than the plexiglass, so this process went pretty fast. I think one of the biggest mistakes is I didn't actually switch out, and I should have, the plexiglass for another piece of wood to finish the rack. So I had to place the bottom part of the rack up a little bit high. That way the tubes could actually rest within their slots without putting undue weight on the plastic plexiglass. Once I figured out what the proper height would be that would match all the tubes once they were in the rack, at this point I just needed to make it aesthetically pleasing. So I came up with 3 pieces that needed to be under the parts where the tubes were the shortest. And so then I just took those to the table saw and cut them to length. Originally I cut a piece of side dressing for the coin rack, and this would also double as a stop for the plexiglass. I wasn't happy with this, so I ended up cutting it in half and making it flush. So here I'm just gluing in the final piece. Okay, I laid down the lid on top of it and take a quick look and see what really do I need to focus on when I'm sanding this. It looks pretty good, but I'm going to sand it anyway, and I'm going to start with the lip of the actual lid just to make sure it's nice and smooth. I spent about 5 minutes with an 80 grit sandpaper sanding the rest of the box. Then I just clamped down the lid in the proper position and added my hinges. I wiped down the box for any remaining sawdust, and at this point I'm ready to stain. I use what I have laying around the garage, so I found some old cherry stain that I used on a bookcase and I thought looked really nice, so I'm going to give this a shot. I'm not going to apply a lot here. I want the wood grains to actually show through, and if you get too dark it changes the complexion of the box. So I'm just going to do one light coat and see how it looks. I threw down a piece of paper here while staining the lid. When you're staining, anything non-porous, stain will not stick to. So as long as you have a paper towel ready, if you get any stain on the plexiglass, it'll wipe right off easily. And the same goes for the hinges. There's no way the stain is going to stick to the hinges, so I just went ahead and painted right on them as I went along, and then just wiped them off when I was done. Although it was cold, the sun was out that day, so I decided to let it just sit in the driveway and cure. So my final step is just to put the latches on, and then I can start filling my box. Now remember, pine is soft, and there's no way at this point I want any wood to split, so I actually pre-drilled all my holes, and one step I used was to make sure the drill bit is not longer than the wood itself. So with the latches on and the rest of the box dry, I go ahead and flip it over, and this time I'm just going to apply this stain with a piece of paper towel. That way I don't get it on the actual board bottom of the box. I just want it on the lip. So finally you can take off the protective coating on your coin rack and slightly bend it into your grooves. Okay, now that I'm complete, I'm really pleased with the way it turned out. If I had to do it all over again, I would cut a lot more holes in the coin tube rack, trying to get as many more tubes in there as I possibly could. Other than that, the stain came out looking great, and I'm very pleased with the overall aesthetics of the box. If there was something I screwed up or you think I could have done better, please leave a comment and let me know. Thanks for watching.